Hey, class, this is the second chapter of psychology, and it's going to be in four parts. And I really like this chapter. I'm not saying it's an easy chapter, but this chapter, unlike some chapters, it's practical. I think this chapter will help you to understand why people behave the way that they do. Why do your friends do what they do? Why do you do what you do? Now, and I mean, this chapter might as well be called behavior, but this chapter is called learning. Why? How do we learn to behave the way that we do? It is 8% of the multiple choice section of the AP exam if you're interested in that. All right, so remember, psychology is the study of how we think, how we feel, and how we behave. And this chapter is going to focus mostly on behavior. Okay? All right, moving right along. So, what is behaviorism? You need to write this down. I would put it on the same note card. This is a major perspective. Now, just remember the last major perspective we studied was called psychodynamic. Okay? And they focused on the unconscious mind. Remember Freud and the iceberg and how boys are unconsciously sexually attracted to their mothers and how we repress memories, we press it down into the unconscious. That's psychodynamic. Okay? Behaviorists come along and basically in the 1920s, and they say Freud is full of crap. He's kind of a crackpot. What behaviorists do is we want to study everything in a laboratory. Okay, so if you were to walk into a psychology lab of a behaviorist in the 1930s or 40s, you would see a lot of pigeons and a lot of rats trying to see, like, how do you change their behavior? Important names, we don't need to go into those, but you're going to be familiar with all four of them. Names are only moderately important. This is a psychology class, not a history class, but you need to understand the theories behind these names. Okay? Now, also in psychology, there is a major debate that's going to keep coming up in almost every chapter: nature versus nurture. Nature is what you're born with, your genetics, your brain, your hormones. Nurture is your environment, how you were raised, how you were treated by your friends. That's your environment. And so Sigmund Freud, the psychoanalyst, would have said it's probably nature. He focused on the unconscious mind. Behaviorists say we don't care about the unconscious mind. We care about environment. We care about nurture. As a matter of fact, a behaviorist would say that I had no choice but to become a teacher. I was shaped to become a teacher through rewards and punishments and things like that, and that I had very little choice in the matter. That's what a behaviorist would say. Okay? All right, make sure you have this written down, hit pause, but let's move on. All right, now this is a little bit of history, but my goal today is to teach you what is classical conditioning. So let's go back to this guy who's Russian or Soviet. His name was Ivan Pavlov. Now, Ivan Pavlov, what he is known for, and this is best explained through video, which I did assign you. Okay, there's a 10-minute video that I assigned you, and you will see a video of this. What Pavlov did was he was a physiologist. He studied biology. And he wanted to study the biology of dogs. And so what he did was he wanted to study salivation. So what he would do is he attached this tube to the salivation glands of a dog. Okay? And he wanted to measure the amount of salivation that a dog would fill that thing up while the dog was eating dog food. Okay? So what Pavlov would do is he would feed the dog, But unfortunately, you know how dogs are. They get excited that they're going to get fed, and they hear the dog food bag rustling or something like that. And and they get excited, and then they fill it up before. So Pavlov tried to distract the dog by doing other things like ringing a bell, ding, 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 and then giving the dog some food. He'd do it again, ding, 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 and give the dog some food. Ding, 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 give the dog some food. And finally, what would happen after a while is that Pavlov would ring the bell, ding, 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 and the dog would just and just fill up the tube with spit without any food at all. So the short version of the story is that the dog was classically conditioned to drool to the bell. Okay? So without any food, the dog would hear the bell and fill that tube up with drool or salivation without any food. That's classical conditioning. Classical conditioning is when you need to write this down. Just the red, but you need to write this down. Classical conditioning is an automatic reflex, okay? It's kind of like you smell something and you automatically get a memory. You don't believe me? Come back to the school 10 years from now and take a whiff of the school. You don't smell it now, but you will. And you're like, oh my God, I remember this. That happened to me at a skating rink recently. I haven't been to a skating rink in 20 years, and I walk in, I'm like, oh my God, I remember that smell. All these memories come back to you. Okay, write this down. So classical, and notice I underlined ASS. That's just me trying to get you to remember. Classical conditioning involves creating an association between two things. Okay? It's kind of like you associate a song with a memory. That's classical conditioning. Let's say you and your girlfriend were fighting to a song, and then 10 years later you hear that song, and then it makes you remember that memory. Okay? Or a smell. You smell your girlfriend's perfume, and you're like, oh, wow, that's interesting. Okay? And one thing that I like to do when there's not a pandemic is that I like to play music when students come into my class. Loud, bassing music, really fun music. Why do I do that? I do it because I want my students, through classical conditioning, to associate my classroom with positive vibes. That's what I try to do. That's why I hate a quiet classroom. Okay? All right, so Ivan Pavlov used classical conditioning to train a dog to drool or salivate to a bell. That's classical conditioning. There are other examples, okay? All right, now if you want, hit pause and go watch the videos, the 10 minutes of videos that I assigned to you. That's what I normally do when I'm teaching this anyway, this is when I show a video about Pavlov, and there's a clip from the show The Office, and there's a couple of other things, and I really want you to see that, okay? All right, so go ahead and hit pause and look at that, but this is a good example of classical conditioning, okay? All right, now this next part, I don't find it easy at all, but I'm going to go through it, okay? I'll have a slide later for you to write this down, but we need to talk about some stuff. So Pavlov, he named or labeled parts of classical conditioning. So you've got what's called the unconditioned stimulus. And in Pavlov's experience, that would have been the meat or the dog food. A stimulus that naturally and automatically triggers a response. So unconditioned means that you do not need to condition the dog to drool to it. A dog does not need to be triggered. trained or conditioned to drool to meat. It happens unconditionally. It happens naturally. Okay? And then in classical conditioning, the unconditioned response, that's the drooling. That's the salivation. This is the unlearned, naturally occurring response to the meat. Okay, if you don't get this yet, be patient with me. I'm going to teach this over and over again, and hopefully you'll get it eventually. Okay? Now, after classical conditioning happens, you get the conditioned stimulus. The conditioned stimulus is this. It's the stimulus, what you're doing to the dog or the person to make them drool or to make them react in a certain way. So after classical conditioning occurs, then the bell becomes the conditioned stimulus. Okay, the dog is not going to drool to the bell before classical conditioning. A dog has to be conditioned to drool to a bell. And finally, how does the dog respond to the bell after classical conditioning happens? He drools to the bell. That's called the conditioned response. Okay, so you have stimulus and you have response. The unconditioned stimulus, the unconditioned response is drooling, and the conditioned response is also drooling. But one is drooled to the bell and one is drooled to the meat. The two stimuli, the unconditioned stimulus is the meat. The dog does not need to be conditioned to drool to meat. The dog does need to be conditioned to the bell. So stimulus is the meat and the bell, something you do to the dog. The response is salivation. Both times it's salivation or some sort of response. Hang in there, okay? Hang in there. So this is a summary of Pavlov's experiment, and this is probably something good to write down. Go ahead and pause and put this on a note card. Notice that both responses are drooling or salivation. The stimuli, both of them, are the food and the bell, what you're doing to the dog. Okay, hit pause because I'm moving on. Same thing, just different picture. Okay. All right, this is not a multiple choice. This is an activity that is pretty challenging, but we're going to look at the scenario and we are going to label those 4 things. Sarah is watching a storm. A bolt of lightning is followed immediately by a huge crash of thunder and makes her jump. This happens several more times. The storm starts to move away and there is a gap between the lightning bolt and the sound of thunder. Yet Sarah jumps at the lightning bolt. Okay, so what this scenario, it's not a perfect scenario, but what it's saying is that she was jumping at the thunder, but then she was classically conditioned to jump to the lightning. Okay? All right, so let's start with the response. That's usually the easiest because how did Sarah respond to the scenario? Both times you could say it was fear or it was she jumped. Okay? So what did she jump to? When she jumped to the thunder, that was the unconditioned response. When she jumped to the lightning, that wasn't natural. So we call that the conditioned response. So both responses are jumping, fear. So what are the stimuli? You've got the thunder and you've got the lightning. So what did Sarah naturally and unconditionally jump to? She naturally jumped to the thunder. But then after classical conditioning occurred, then she jumped to the lightning. It's not the best example because we're kind of afraid of both, but the sound is very disturbing. All right, let's try a few more scenarios and hopefully it'll stick. Okay? All right. Raphael knocks on his desk and pokes, the helpless girl in the neck with his sharpened pencil. Then Raphael does it again. Ow! Ow! And then finally, Raphael knocks on his desk and the girl flinches her shoulders and her neck, only to the sound of the knock on the desk. By the way, I've seen students do this before. It works. Even my own psychology students, it works. Okay? So, how does the girl respond? Let's start with the response. What is she doing in response to the poking of her and to the knocking? She flinches. Okay, so both of the responses are going to be flinching. What does she flinch to naturally without any classical conditioning? What is she flinching to unconditionally without any classical conditioning? That would be to the poke because it hurts. Ow! That would be to the poke. Now, what does she react to after classical conditioning? Just the knock. If you watch the video of the college guy shooting his friend with the airsoft gun, this will make a little bit more sense. Hit pause and go watch that. Okay? Now, unconditioned stimulus. There are two stimuli that Raphael is doing. He's knocking and then he's poking with her in the neck with a sharpened pencil. The unconditioned stimulus, what the girl is flinching to unconditionally, is the poke in the neck. The conditioned stimulus, what the girl responds to after classical conditioning, would be simply the knock on the desk. Okay? Hang in there, go watch those videos, and it might make more sense. Okay? Steve's mouth waters whenever he eats anything with lemon in it. One day, while seeing an ad showing lemons, his mouth begins to water. Okay, so this is kind of like training a dog to drool to a bell. It's drooling, salivation. Okay. So what is the response? Drooling or salivation. Okay. What is Steve drooling to naturally without any classical conditioning? The lemon. What is he drooling to after conditioning? The commercial, the advertisement. So what are the stimuli? What naturally, the unconditioned stimulus, what is naturally makes Steve drool without any kind of classical conditioning? The lemon. And what does he drool to after classical conditioning? What is conditioned? He drools to the advertisement. Okay. All right. Now, this is a multiple choice question. I hope this is a lot easier, but we'll see. Pavlov found that the meat powder placed on a dog's tongue will make the dog salivate. In Pavlov's terms, the meat powder is what? Okay, so the meat powder, the food, the meat. So let me ask you this. Does the dog need to be classically conditioned to drool to food? No. The dog will do it naturally. The dog will do it unconditionally. Unconditionally. So that means it's either A or B. Now, is food a stimulus or is food a response? The answer is A. Food is a stimulus, and it unconditionally makes the dog drool. All right, multiple choice. In Pavlov's original experiment on classical conditioning, the unconditioned response was what? Okay, so how did the dog respond? He drooled or salivated. So that means the answer is either B or D. Okay, so now we're talking unconditional response, meaning the dog did not need to be trained to salivate. So B or D, which one? Which one does it happens unconditionally without any kind of weird classical conditioning? It happens unconditionally. The answer is D. You don't need to train a dog to drool to meat powder. The dog will do it unconditionally. In classical conditioning, the stimulus that naturally evokes an unlearned response. So it's a stimulus, and it's a natural stimulus that evokes an unlearned response. The answer is, make sure your answer is a stimulus and make sure that it's natural. The answer is B. Okay. All right. This question was on the AP exam. I took out answer choice E. Researchers paired. Whenever you see the word paired, that means classical conditioning. Researchers paired rats drinking of saccharin-sweetened water with injections of a drug that weakened the immune system. After repeated pairings, sweetened water triggered the rats' immune systems to break down. What was the conditioned stimulus in the study? Okay, so we're looking for the conditioned stimulus, not the response, but the stimulus. The response was the breakdown of the immune system. The stimuli or the stimulus was either the drug or the sweetened water. The stimulus means what are you doing to the rat? Okay, what are you doing to it? That means stimulus. And conditioned means you need to have some sort of classical conditioning for it to happen. So the answer is sweetened water. So it's conditioned. The unconditioned stimulus is the drug. The sweetened water is the conditioned stimulus. C and D, those are responses. Okay. All right, this is a strange question, but it's a good one. Daryl was dancing with his new girlfriend at an Elvis tribute. When the band started playing his Can't Help Falling in Love with You, his girlfriend gave him a long, passionate kiss, which Daryl found very enjoyable. Now Daryl finds that every time he hears that song on the radio, he becomes mildly excited. In this example, the long, passionate kiss. Okay, so is the kiss a stimulus, something that is done to Daryl, or is the kiss a response? The kiss is a stimulus. The response would be sexual arousal. Okay, that's the response. Okay, so do you find it natural to get sexually aroused by a song, or do you have to be conditioned to get aroused by a song? I know that's weird, but that's the way it is. All right, the answer is Right. So the kiss naturally makes him aroused. Okay. It's a stimulus. It's something that's done to Daryl. One Saturday, Lacey was sitting at home when the telephone rang. A local company was making promotional calls and told Lacey that she had just won a $1,000 gift certificate. She felt a rush of excitement at the thought of what she could do with $1,000. Now Lacey finds that whenever she hears a telephone ring, she feels a surge of excitement. All right, hit pause and read that again if you need to. In this example, the rush of excitement that Lacey felt when she heard she had won the gift certificate. Okay, so the rush of excitement, that's a response. The stimuli is the telephone ringing and hearing that she won the gift certificate. The rush of excitement, that's a response. So let me ask you this. Is it natural to feel excited when you just learned that you had just won $1,000? Is that natural, or do you need to have some sort of conditioning for you to feel that way? The answer is C. It's unconditioned response. It's natural to feel that way when you won $1,000. Okay. Charity used to really enjoy potato salad at a family reunion. Charity used to really enjoy potato salad, and at a family reunion, she ate a large helping. Unfortunately, the potato salad had not been kept cold, and Charity became quite ill after eating it. Now she finds that even the sight of potatoes in the grocery store can make her feel sick to her stomach. In this example, the sick feeling Charity experiences when she sees potatoes in the grocery store is what? Okay, hit pause and read it again if you need to. The sick feeling she experiences, that's a response. She is responding with nausea and sickness. Now, let me ask you this. Is it normal to feel sick when you see potatoes at a grocery store? Or do you need some sort of classical conditioning for that to happen? Okay, the sick feeling, that's a response. So make sure your answer is response. And the answer is it's a conditioned response because it's not normal to feel sick when you look at potatoes in the grocery store. That's weird. That takes classical conditioning. Frederick cringes every time he hears a dentist drill, even when he is sitting in the waiting room of his dentist's office. In this example, the pain of dental drilling is okay, so the dentist gives him pain and that makes him feel cringy. That's natural. That's unconditional. So in this case, the pain is not a response. The cringing is the response. The pain is the stimulus. It's the stimulus that naturally makes Frederick cringe. So the answer is no, it's B. It's B. Okay? The answer is B. Unconditioned stimulus. The pain is unconditioned stimulus. Okay, the answer is B. I screwed up. Okay. An unconditioned response would be the cringing to the drilling. The cringing is the response. The cringing is the response. All right. Simon cringes every time he hears a dentist drill, even when he is sitting in the waiting room of his dentist's office. In this example, cringing in the waiting room is what? All right, is cringing in the waiting room, is that normal? No, that takes classical conditioning. Okay, is cringing a stimulus or is cringing a response? Cringing is a response. So it's not natural, it's a response. So the answer is a conditioned response. It's not natural, so it's conditioned. A woman reported feeling, quote, weak in the knees whenever she smelled cigarette smoke and Beeman's gum because of the association of these smells with her first love. So, guys, be aware your girlfriend may be giving you cologne that her first love was wearing. Be aware of that. In this example, her weak knees, think of that as sexual arousal, okay? Her weak knees would be what? All right, is it normal to be sexually aroused by cigarettes and Beeman's gum? I'd say that's pretty weird. So that would mean that this is conditioned. Now, weak knees, is that a stimulus, something that's done to her, or is that how she is responding? It's a response. So being sexually aroused to cigarette smoke and Beeman's gum, that is a conditioned response. Okay. All right, this is off the AP exam. A cancer patient becomes nauseated following chemotherapy treatments. After a few treatments, the patient begins having a sick feeling whenever entering the treatment room. The treatment room has become what? So this is a real world application. Okay, this is the real world. This isn't just theory. This actually happens. So is the treatment room a response or, all right, so in this case, they helped us out. They didn't give us any responses. They gave us reinforcers, but those aren't the answers. So it's not A, it's not B. Okay, so is it normal to feel sick just by going into the treatment room? No, that's not normal. So the treatment room is a conditioned stimulus. This is the real world. This is what hospitals have to deal with. So come up with your own examples of classical conditioning. You know, think about it. Think about like how do you respond to at school when a bell rings? You know, or how about when your cell phone, when you hear a cell phone ding, how do you respond to that? Or here's something, there's a TikTok thing where women are playing the theme of Fox football, da-da-dun, 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 and watching the men just come into the living room like, what's going on? That you might consider that classical conditioning. Okay. All right, write this down. The video explains it better than I can, but here's the deal. John Watson he took Pavlov's ideas and he turned them into psychology. He put them in a lab. He took a little baby and he trained this baby to fear a white rat. Okay? Then, after he did that, the baby then became afraid of all furry things. That's called generalization. He was afraid of just the white rat. Now he becomes afraid of all furry things. Okay? So watch the video. It explains it a little bit better, and I'll explain it again in tutoring. Okay? So he would bang, bang, and then show him the white rat. Bang, show him the white rat. Bang, show him the white rat. And then eventually the little baby was afraid of the white rat. Originally, he was just afraid of the gong, the banging sound. Then he became afraid of all similar things. All right. So if you read this quote, you will see that John Watson believed that everything was about environment. Okay? You come into this world with a blank slate. I think we can all disagree that we do bring things into this world. But John Watson says that we all are made by our environment. We are all shaped. by our environment. Okay, now if you haven't done it yet, go watch those classical conditioning videos, and that's it for today.